Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York City and speak with author, Professor Dr. Michael Hudson, who, in a previous life, was a balance of payments economist for Chase Manhattan Bank. We'll get into why that's important in a second here. Dr. Michael Hudson, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Good to be here again, Max.
Donald Trump, steel tariffs. Are they warranted? Are they a good idea? What's going on, Dr. Michael Hudson?
I think what they are is a shakedown. They don't seem to make sense economically, and I'll explain that later. But I've been spending 2 days trying to figure out, since the logic is a travesty of protectionism, is going to squeeze American producers who use steel and aluminum. So there must be something else. And I think that something else is Trump is trying to renegotiate the tariffs with Canada and Mexico. And these are the countries that are the most highly hit in steel and aluminum exports to the United States. So I think what Trump is saying, and he's already said, well, I will exempt them from these tariffs, and I'll save them from having unemployment in their steel and aluminum industries if they give a couple of concessions and rewrite NAFTA. And I think his plan to rewrite NAFTA is to go to Mexico and say, okay, we'll exempt you from these tariffs, but you have to build that wall. And you have to give us other gains as well. And obviously, the president is not going to pay money to build that wall because his concern is with his own Mexican voters, not with American voters. And as for Canada, they've lost out on every kind of agreement they've made since the auto agreements of the 1960s with the United States. And I think Trump is saying to Canada, well, look, you're going to have unemployment in your steel industry, and especially Alcan, Canada's aluminum companies, unless you make a give back to us in auto part trade and agricultural trade and certain other trade things. And of course, Canada, I think, has reached the point at which they've sort of had enough of this pushing, and they can't politically do it and still hold on to power. So I think it's a no-go there. And then just today, Trump has come out and said, well, you know, today's the day that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to be settled abroad by many of the Asian countries. And under this new deal without the United States being a member, that will exclude American agricultural and other exports by it'll give preference to Australia and to other countries. So I think Trump has already said, well, I prefer bilateral agreements because bilaterally we can divide and conquer and smash them up. And so he will then tell the Asian nations, unless you make a special deal for American agriculture, we're going to put special tariffs on you. And the whole thing is going to be we can screw your economy if you don't go along with what we're proposing for you. Let's suppose that other countries say, well, I'm sorry, we can't afford to do this. We're not going, when you come up, Mr. Trump, and you say, I'm going to win and you're going to lose, all our voters are going to read that in the newspaper, and they're not going to let us do that. So here's what's going to happen. I think Trump will indeed say, okay, he'll try to bully them. He'll raise the tariffs on steel and aluminum. In the last month, steel prices have gone up 33%, and aluminum prices 40%, according to the Financial Times graphs. And this has already squeezed companies that use aluminum and like keg makers for beer and people that make things out of it. That now they're going to be squeezed with higher raw materials prices, but there are no tariffs on the finished manufacturers coming in from Asia or Europe. So this is going to be the reverse of what protectionism is supposed to be. There's a long legacy of good protectionist arguments, and the strategy is you import your raw materials cheaply, and you try to get monopoly goods and high value-added exports. But what Trump is doing is the reverse of the way that England and America and Germany and France all got rich on protectionism. He's raising the price of raw materials and squeezing the higher manufacturers. So the effect of his policy is going to be deindustrialization and unemployment rather than And nobody is going to build a new steel mill or a new aluminum mill because they don't believe that these tariffs, being so self-destructive of manufacturing, have much chance of lasting very long. So the protectionist logic of raising tariffs to enable the manufacturers to get enough money so that they can afford to invest more factories and hire more people, that's not going to work. There's no logic to it economically.
Let's talk about steel. I mean, anytime you're talking about trade and trade policies, there's a lot of moving parts, and it's difficult to wade through all of the economics and the incentives going across the globe in different countries. But let's just talk about steel for a second. So he's obviously trying to create more high-paying jobs in the steel industry by putting on these tariffs in such a way as to level the playing field in the steel industry. The recently laid off steel workers, can go back to work. So it's not necessarily about building a new steel factory, but putting guys back on the floor. Now you've got some higher paid jobs, and politically, this sounds like a winner. He said he was going to increase jobs and bring back steel. So in the short term, at least, this seems like there's a lot of political logic to it. As you point out, though, Dr. Hudson, so if American workers are now suddenly getting some higher-priced jobs in the steel business, that would infer that some high-priced workers in other countries are going to get squeezed, right? So, but in the short term, for political expediency, this, as far as cosmetics go, looks like it could be a winner, right?
It looks like it if you take into account only the what's happening with America, a few jobs being created here. And the question is, how many jobs will be lost? The Manufacturers Association, the Department of Commerce, the number of think tanks have already said there are going to be many more manufacturing jobs lost than steel jobs are created. And for every job that's gained here, as you just pointed out, somebody's going to lose a job in Canada and Mexico. And what do you think their response is going to be? Their response is going to be to retaliate. And now they not only do their manufacturers who can buy the steel that was exported to the U.S. to make steel goods, their manufacturers can now make these steel goods and export them to the United States at having cheaper raw materials than the American manufacturers themselves had. So they can do that, and Canada and Mexico and other countries get to retaliate and cherry pick. Well, what kind of American high technology exports do we want to exclude and retaliate to help us? Well, Canada has Bombardier company making rail cars and airplanes. It can certainly put limits on Boeing. Mexico can limit American beer and build up its own beer industry. This is not a trade war that America can win as easily as Mr. Trump thinks that he can.
I remember under Obama and previous administrations, there was always that line about, well, we've made a deal. We've got to honor the deal. And it seems like Donald Trump doesn't have that kind of same ethos when it comes to deal making. He's like, there's no deal is a deal I can't rip up. How does this play into things? I mean, on one hand, you could say it's dishonorable, but on the other hand, you could say that radical approach is needed. He was voted as a change maker, and as a rogue element in American politics, he's got to rip up these deals and start fresh. But how does that play globally, Dr. Hudson?
Well, remember the title of Mr. Trump's book, The Art of Breaking the Deal. That's how he made all of his money. He stiffed his suppliers. When it came time to pay, he'd say, well, I really don't like the quality. I'll give you 80% of what you want, or I'll maybe 50% of what you want. If you don't like it, spend 5 years suing me, and it's really cheaper for you to take a 20% or 30% cut. He stiffed the banks. He said, I'm sorry, there's no money to pay. I'll have to go bankrupt and wipe you out unless you renegotiate the deal. Same thing for labor unions. Well, I promised to pay you, but, I really don't like the work. I'm not going to pay you what I promised. So he made his fortune by breaking the deal. And in business the criminal parts of society, that works. It doesn't work in international diplomacy so much, because now foreign countries will say, wait a minute, if we sign a deal with the United States, like Iran signed the deal with all the other countries, and then the United States can say, well, we're going to break the deal. We broke the deal, international trade deals in the 1960s. We broke them in the 1970s, in the 1980s. That's what we do. Honoring the deal is for you guys. We can break it anytime we want, anytime we think we can cause you so many problems. You can go to court. You can wait to get paid. You can wait to retaliate. We can stall and just act quicker and hurt you. This is going to make other countries believe that, I think the Russian term is not agreement worthy, not agreement credible. They won't believe that America can be part of trade agreements or military agreements or disarmament agreements. The whole idea of holding to international agreements is thrown out the window.
Typically, whenever any policy changes, you have Wall Street rushing in to capitalize on it in some way, using their over-leveraged models and access to finance and their control of the central bank. And Donald Trump ostensibly is doing something to help American workers. And will he be able to get this past Wall Street? In other words, will the companies that are affected by this somehow engineer a way to maybe take this in, engage in stock buybacks and other financial tricks that they're used to? In other words, can Donald Trump put a policy in to help workers in a way that shuts Wall Street out of their vulturous kind of predatory techniques?
Well, in the past, Wall Street's always been able to go to Congress, because Congress is in charge of trade deals, not the executive branch. But what Trump has done is a very clever way of locking Wall Street out and locking Congress out. The tariffs are not part of the trade agreement. Technically, they're national security. Our national security is being threatened, he'll say, by having to...
Okay, but listen, if you say he's figured out a way to lock Wall Street out, that sounds good to me. Can you stay for another segment?
Sure.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Michael Hudson. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.